The sun burned hot over ancient Babylon, but beneath the sand something was waiting. In 1899, a team of explorers uncovered ruins they couldn't explain. A door sealed for 4,000 years, opened by accident. And what lay inside was not just stone. It was technology, older than history, symbols that matched no known language, and a tower so tall it reached the stars. Some say it was just a myth. But what if the Tower of Babel was real? And what if it was never destroyed? Just hidden. Welcome to Historia Unseen. My name is John, and I'm the voiceover artist for this channel. Today, I'll take you deep into one of the world's greatest mysteries. The sky over Babylon was always red at sunset, but no one expected what lay hidden beneath it for 4,000 years. A lost city, a forgotten tower, a story older than any book ever written, and one explorer who would uncover a secret the world wasn't ready for. What if everything we thought was a myth was actually true? What if the Tower of Babel was never destroyed, just buried and waiting to rise again? Stay with us, because what you're about to see could change how we see human history forever. This is the true story behind the rise of Babylon and the tower that tried to reach the sky. Welcome to History. I'm John, the voiceover artist for this channel, and this is part 1, the birth of a nation. In the dry heat of ancient Mesopotamia, before countries were born, there was only dust, water, and dreams. 2 rivers carved through the land like veins, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Between them, a people settled, not because they wanted to survive, but because they wanted to build something eternal. They were not kings. They were not warriors. They were farmers, stonemasons, dreamers. But they had something no one else had: unity. While other tribes fought over land and food, these people worked together. They shared knowledge, tools, and belief. They believed in the stars, in the sky above them, and the gods who they thought watched from above. And then one day, a man rose from among them. His name was Nimrod. He was not born royal, but his voice had power. His eyes saw things others could not, and his dreams were bigger than the earth itself. He told the people, "We will not live in huts like animals. We will not bow to the land. We will build a city, a kingdom, and a tower that reaches the heavens themselves." At first, they laughed. A tower to the sky? Madness. But Nimrod did not laugh. He laid the first stone himself, in the middle of the plain. He marked the center of the world. Brick by brick, the city began to rise. It wasn't called Babylon yet. It had no walls, no name. But the dream was alive. Workers came from all corners of the region. They spoke different tongues, but they followed the same leader. And under Nimrod, the people grew strong. They built canals, temples, markets. They made a place where strangers became family. And slowly, the land between the rivers became the heart of a new world. They called it Shinar. It would become the world's first supercity. But the people weren't satisfied. Not yet. Nimrod reminded them again and again, "We are not just building a city. We are building a stairway to the gods." The workers now worked day and night. Kilns burned 24 hours. Bricks stacked higher than any structure known in their time. No one had seen anything like it. Not in Egypt, not in Sumer, not in the far lands of the East. It was something new. It was a statement, a message carved in stone. We are not afraid of heaven. We will rise to it. But with each brick came whispers. Old men feared the gods would be angry. Priests warned that heaven had rules. But Nimrod didn't listen. He laughed at the warnings. He called the gods jealous. He said, "They fear us because they know we will reach them." And the people believed him. Until one night, a strange sound echoed through the sky. The ground shook, the tower groaned, and the stars seemed to blink. Some say it was just wind. Some say it was the earth shifting. But the oldest among them said something else. They said, "The gods have heard." The next morning, workers began to argue, not just about tools or bricks, but about language. They could no longer understand each other. The same words sounded different. Orders were confused. Instructions lost. Chaos spread like wildfire. The great unity of the people was breaking apart. And so the tower stood half-built, the city incomplete. The dream unfinished. The people scattered. They took their languages with them, and Shinar became silent. Years passed. Centuries faded. Babylon rose on top of those ruins. But the tower was never spoken of again, until now. The desert wind blew quietly, but underneath the ground, the earth was ready to speak again. It was 1899, and deep in southern Iraq, a group of British explorers arrived with old maps, and even older questions. They weren't treasure hunters. They were scholars, but they didn't come for gold. They came for something more valuable: truth. The locals told them stories of cursed places, of ground that whispered, and doors that should never be opened. Most laughed it off, but one explorer named Edward Chandler listened carefully. He studied ancient writings, and something stood out. A tablet found years earlier in Nineveh mentioned a hidden chamber beneath Babylon, a door built for the gods, sealed after the tower fell. Edward followed the signs and found a strange mound far from the main city ruins. It looked like nothing, just dirt, rocks, old earth. But when they dug just 12 feet down, they hit stone, smooth, black carved. It wasn't like anything in the region. No bricks, no mud, something else. The team cleared it carefully. A large doorway was revealed, shaped like an arch, covered in writing no one could understand. The script danced in spirals. The symbols glowed faintly in sunlight. And in the center of the door, a handprint. Edward pressed his hand against it. Nothing happened, but that night, something strange began. The workers couldn't sleep. They heard humming, like a soft sound vibrating through the ground. Some said it was wind. Others weren't so sure. The next morning, they returned to the site, and the door was open, but no one had touched it. No tools, no force. It had simply opened on its own. Behind it, a long tunnel led into darkness. Cool air poured out, like something had been sealed for thousands of years. Edward lit a torch and walked in. The walls inside were covered with markings. Strange ones, not cuneiform, not Sumerian. They looked almost mechanical. The tunnel went deep underground, twisting like a snake, until finally, it opened into a chamber, a massive, round space with stone panels. At the center, a tall column covered in rings and symbols. The room had no torches, but it was glowing faintly, like the light came from the stone itself. And on the far wall, a mural. It showed a tower spiraling up into the clouds, people building it together, and above it, beams of light coming down, like fire from a sky. And then, in the final part of the mural, people were running. Some were crying. Others had their hands over their ears. One of the workers gasped, "This is the Tower of Babel." Edward didn't speak. He couldn't, because next to the mural was something even stranger, a metallic object, long, smooth, shaped like a blade, but with no edges. They had never seen anything like it. Edward reached out, touched it, and it started to hum, soft at first, then louder. The walls lit up. The rings on the center column began to spin. Dust lifted off the floor. The workers panicked and ran, but Edward stayed. He was frozen, not with fear, but with wonder. The object in his hand was glowing blue now. And then he heard it, a voice, not out loud, but in his head. It whispered, "The tower must not rise again." The glow stopped. The humming faded. The air turned cold. Edward dropped the object, but it didn't fall. It hovered, suspended in air, then slowly floated back to its original place on the wall. The room dimmed again. Silence returned. Edward stumbled out of the tunnel, pale and shaking. He didn't sleep that night, nor the next. He had touched something impossible. He had seen the truth. The Tower of Babel wasn't just real. It was guarded, and the chamber they found was not a tomb. It was a warning. The sun had just begun to rise, but Edward Chandler hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat alone in his tent, staring at his hands. His fingers still shook. His mind kept replaying the voice. The tower must not rise again. He had touched something impossible, something not from this world. But there were no cameras, no recordings, only what he saw and what he remembered. The team around him didn't believe it. They thought he imagined it. Too much heat, too little food. But Edward knew the truth. So the next morning, he returned to the chamber. Alone, he carried a notebook, a lantern, and quiet fear. When he stepped back into the room, it was silent again. Still, like nothing had ever moved. But when his light touched the far wall, he noticed something new. Scratches. Thin, perfect lines drawn in circles, as if something had rotated against the wall. Not ancient drawings. Machine marks. He turned toward the column in the center, the one with rings that had spun. He walked slowly and placed his hand on it. Nothing happened, but when he looked closely, he saw tiny grooves across its surface. Grooves that matched gears. Not random, not decorative, engineered. Edward knelt down, brushed away dust, and found something that made his breath stop. A metal plate, flat, round, with symbols etched on it. He touched it. It was warm, not from sunlight. The room was underground. It was generating heat on its own. He flipped it over. On the back were holes, like it once connected to something else. A worker behind him gasped. "I've seen something like that," he said. Edward turned. The man pointed to a book. Inside were photographs from older digs, artifacts found near Egypt and the Indus Valley, all labeled, unexplained, all ignored. But now, Edward was connecting the dots. He began cataloging every object in the chamber. There were long rods, like modern antennae, thick rings with internal teeth, like gears, even one object that looked like a screen. It was cracked, dead, but shaped like a flat slate, smooth glass on top, and thin wiring on the sides. This wasn't myth. This wasn't magic. This was technology, and it didn't belong to any known civilization. The problem was, he couldn't explain it to the outside world. Not yet. So Edward made a decision. He would send a message to London, requesting more tools, experts, and secrecy. But just as he sealed the letter, the power inside the chamber turned on again. He heard the hum, faint but real. He rushed back in. This time, the rings were glowing. Symbols along the column began to shift, like a language changing forms. One symbol stood out, a spiral. It pulsed with light. Edward touched it, and a part of the floor slowly sank inward. Another door. Beneath the chamber was another level. He lit a torch and stepped down the new staircase. The walls were smoother here, polished, shining. He reached the bottom, and there, at the center of the second chamber, was a platform, and on it, a cube, black, silent, floating 2 inches off the ground. It didn't look like stone. It didn't look human. Edward approached slowly. He circled it once, twice. No seams, no buttons, just pure shape and silence. He reached out, but didn't touch. Then the cube spun once in the air, just slightly. Then again. Then it stopped. A single glowing dot appeared on its side, and Edward heard the voice again. "You are not the first." He froze. The air turned heavy. His heartbeat pounded like thunder in his ears. "You are not the last." The cube dimmed. The voice faded, and everything returned to stillness. Edward backed away, climbed the stairs, and sealed the chamber behind him. He wrote nothing in his journal that night, not a word, because he no longer believed he had found ruins. He believed he had found a machine, one that had been buried. For a reason, dust still clung to Edward Chandler's coat, but it wasn't from the ruins. It was from the past itself. He hadn't told the others what he saw. Not about the voice, not about the cube, not about the words. "You are not the first, you are not the last." Because now, he wasn't just digging for history. He was standing in the middle of something bigger, something older and smarter. The team continued their excavation, believing they were just uncovering ancient temples. But under Edward's instructions, they dug deeper, beneath the second chamber. And that's where they found it. A long hallway, perfectly straight, walls smooth as glass. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. At the end of the hallway was a door. No carvings, no symbols, just a perfect, seamless wall of black stone. And at the center, a spiral-shaped mark. Edward paused. It matched the symbol from the spinning column. He pressed his hand against it. At first, nothing happened. Then, the wall melted. Not like fire, like light. It parted in silence, vanishing into itself, and revealed a room so bright they had to shield their eyes. Inside were slabs of crystal, 6 of them, floating in midair, each glowing with golden symbols. They hovered gently, like feathers in water, and on the far side of the room was a massive stone tablet. At first, it looked like another wall, but when Edward moved closer, he saw it was covered in lines, measurements, equations, and at the center, a spiral tower. He couldn't believe it. It wasn't a drawing. It was a blueprint out of full structural plan of the Tower of Babel. Floor by floor, level by level, it showed stairs winding upward like DNA, pillars balanced by magnetic supports, and something incredible at the top. A circular chamber labeled with a symbol he had seen before. A star. He traced the lines with his fingers. The base of the tower alone was nearly a mile wide. The top, beyond the clouds. He measured the full height, 11,000 feet, higher than any mountain in the region, twice the height of the tallest building on Earth today. It wasn't just impossible, it was perfect. Edward sat down, stunned. The math was clean, the angles precise. It was designed by someone who understood modern physics, gravity, pressure, wind resistance. And yet this design was thousands of years old, or older. He turned to one of the floating crystal slabs. It began to spin slowly, then projected a hologram, a 3D model of the tower, rising, spinning, glowing. He watched in awe. This was no myth, no legend. The Tower of Babel was a real structure, and someone somewhere had planned to finish it. Suddenly, the room darkened. All crystals stopped spinning. The door behind them sealed shut again without a sound. And then a single symbol appeared on the hologram. A warning triangle. Red. Flashing. Edward stepped back. Then the projection zoomed out and showed a map. Not of the tower, not of Babylon, but of the stars. A cluster of light shaped like a belt. Orion. And at the bottom of the map, 3 symbols pulsed. The tower, the cube, and a star. Edward felt his throat go dry. This wasn't just a monument. It was a beacon, designed to point upward, to something far beyond Earth. And then the voice spoke from the crystal. Low, calm, unfamiliar. It said, Stage 1 complete. The light faded. The symbols vanished. The room returned to silence. Edward walked out slowly. His eyes were wide. His hands were cold. He now believed something he never expected. The Tower of Babel was not made to reach heaven. It was made to connect with it. The blueprint was real. The tower was real. But it had never been finished. Why? That question haunted Edward Chandler as he stared at the crystal slabs, now dim and silent. What had stopped the builders? Was it war? Was it nature? Or was it something else? Something that didn't want the tower to be completed. Edward dug deeper. He began translating the symbols around the projection chamber. Most of them were math, pure science. But one panel was different. It was written in a strange mix of symbols and ancient script. After days of comparing notes, he translated the message. It said, "Those who rise too far must fall. The gate must remain closed." Edward circled the phrase again and again. What gate? Was the tower not just a monument, but an opening? The next morning, one of his workers, Yusuf, came running from the dig site. He had found something. A broken slab, buried just outside the main chamber. On it, carved deep into stone, was a scene unlike anything they'd seen before. It showed the tower, tall, finished, glorious. People standing at the top, arms raised to the sky. But above them, a burning light shaped like an eye. And in the next part of the scene, the light came down, straight through the top of the tower, and the tower cracked. People were shown falling, screaming, running in all directions. The sky above them split apart, lightning, fire, confusion. One line of symbols under the scene read. The voices were shattered. The message scrambled. The tower silenced. Edward went still. This was no earthquake. This wasn't collapse from inside. The tower had been targeted from above. He went back to the tablet with the star map. He marked the location of the tower, then drew a line toward the Orion cluster. That's when he noticed something. The beam from the top of the tower wasn't just pointing at the stars. It was drawing power from them. A receiver, not a transmitter. The tower wasn't just trying to send a message. It was waiting for something to arrive. Or maybe it already had. That night, Edward reviewed old Mesopotamian texts. He found a passage from an ancient priest. They came not with feet, but with light. They broke the tongue of men and scattered the voices into the wind. Suddenly he understood. The story of the Tower of Babel was not just about pride, not about men challenging the gods. It was about connection. The tower had become too powerful, too close to reaching something outside Earth. And that something responded. With fire, with confusion, with division. It broke the language of the builders, split them apart, so they could never build together again. Not because of punishment, but to prevent reconnection. Edward's notes grew darker. He wrote, "The fall of the tower was an act of interference. The division of language was not natural. It was a reset. But reset by who? And why?" Then a final discovery. Inside the second chamber, hidden behind one of the gear walls, his team found a box. Stone on the outside, but lined with thin sheets of glowing metal. Inside the box was a disc. Circular, smooth, dark gray. No writing, just a groove around the edge. They took it to the crystal room. When Edward placed the disc on the platform, the crystals lit up again. A single phrase echoed through the chamber. One voice became many. The signal was broken. Do not rebuild. Then the lights faded, and the disc disintegrated in a flash of heat and ash. Gone. No trace left. Edward stepped back in silence. He had his answer. The Tower of Babel had not fallen because of man's arrogance. It had fallen because it worked, and something didn't want it to. It was written in every old book, taught in temples, passed down in whispers for thousands of years. That long ago, the world spoke one language. But then something happened, something that shattered that unity. And from that day forward, humans could no longer understand each other. For centuries, it was treated as a myth, a lesson in pride, a warning about power. But Edward Chandler no longer believed it was a story. He believed it was true. Because inside the second chamber, beneath the ancient ruins of Babylon, he had heard it for himself. A voice that spoke without words. It entered his mind directly. It didn't use sound. It didn't use language. And that's when he realized, language might not be natural at all. It might be a barrier, one placed between humans, to stop them from building what they once had. The next day, Edward examined the carvings again, this time focusing on the people. In the early murals, everyone shared tools, ideas, visions. But in the final carvings, after the destruction, he noticed something else. Small symbols above each group. Groups facing east had one symbol. Those running west had another. The builders were being divided, not just by land, but by thought, by voice. He brought in a linguistic expert from Europe, Dr. Meyer. She examined the symbols carefully, then said something that sent chills through the team. "These are not words," she whispered. "They're language roots, the foundations of entire speech systems. Sumerian, Akkadian, Proto-Indo-European, even sound similar to Chinese and Mayan phonetics. All of them carved into one wall, almost like someone had taken a single language and broken it into pieces. Each group carried one fragment. No one had the full key. Edward's hands shook as he connected the dots. This wasn't just the beginning of human speech. It was the breaking of it, and science strangely backed it up. Linguists today can trace nearly all human languages back to just a few roots. But no one knows where the original came from, or why it changed so suddenly. Until now. Edward looked over one final object. A small stone cube, smooth black, hidden in a sealed drawer. When placed on the platform, it didn't glow like the others. Instead, it began to sing. Not with words, but with tones. Pure, haunting tones. Each listener heard something different. One worker heard an ancient prayer. Another heard what sounded like modern music. Edward heard a voice calling his name. The cube didn't play a message. It played understanding, not in language, but in meaning. And then it stopped. The cube cracked and turned to dust. Edward stood in silence. His theory was complete. The Tower of Babel wasn't built to challenge the gods. It was built to unite the minds of mankind, to bring every thought, every word, every idea into one shared voice. That unity gave them power, but someone didn't want that power to last. So they shattered the language, scattered the people, and buried the truth beneath stories. They made humans forget that they were once one, and that voice, the one Edward heard in the chamber, was not just speaking to him. It had spoken before, long ago, to the builders, to the leaders, and now it had spoken again. But for what reason? To warn? Or to prepare? Because if the voice had returned, it meant something was changing again. Something was coming, and the silence wouldn't last forever. The discovery changed everything. The ruins beneath Babylon, the cube, the voice, and the language that once united all of mankind. Edward Chandler had found proof that the Tower of Babel was real. But now, he was about to find out something far more terrifying. The story wasn't over. It was just paused. Months after returning to London, Edward sent his research to astronomers. He included the star maps, the tower blueprint, and the strange signals. One astronomer, Dr. Helen Wyatt, contacted him in secret. She said, "We've seen these shapes before. Not in books, in space." She invited him to an observatory high in the Swiss Alps. There, they reviewed data from a satellite launched 2 decades earlier. It had been scanning deep space, and it recorded a signal, a strange pulse buried in background noise. No one had noticed it before, but when they placed Edward's spiral symbol into a decoding algorithm, the pattern changed. It turned into coordinates, pointing toward a location, not on Earth, but in the Orion belt. The same cluster shown on the tower's blueprint, the same shape etched on the wall. The signal wasn't random. It was a reply. Edward stared at the screen. The satellite had captured the transmission 6 months ago, right when the cube had whispered to him underground. It was timed perfectly. Dr. Wyatt leaned closer. She said, "Edward, I don't think the tower was just a building. It was the receiver. A gateway. One designed to open communication between Earth and something out there. Something watching. But it had been shut down. Because last time, they came too close. And maybe this time, they were coming back." As more data came in, strange things started happening. Several deep space telescopes went offline. A private observatory in Chile picked up new pulses, matching the Babel tone. Radio static near ancient ruins spiked in unusual patterns. One signal repeated the same shape over and over, a spiral. Then one night, Edward received a call. A probe near the edge of the solar system had picked up an object. Not a planet, not a comet. It was small, geometric, almost artificial. Its surface reflected no light. Its shape, a black cube, moving slowly, silently, and headed toward Earth. Panic swept through the scientific community, but no news reports came. It was kept quiet, buried, just like the tower. Edward stood alone in his study, holding the only piece of real truth, a journal filled with every discovery, every blueprint, every whisper, and one final translation from the base of the spiral chamber. Words carved deep, hidden beneath dust, only recently translated. It said, "When the tower fell, we closed the sky. When it rises again, the sky will open." Edward turned off the lights, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "It's rising again, isn't it?" What they found in Babylon wasn't just history. It wasn't just myth. It was a system that once connected Earth to something far beyond it. And now that system is waking up, brick by brick, signal by signal, memory by memory. And this time, we may not be ready. This was Babylon. Tower of Babel was real. History's greatest mysteries. Thanks for watching the full story on history. I'm John, your narrator. Until the next mystery, stay curious.